Greetings everyone. Father James Martin recently did an interview for the New York Times. Now the fact that he would do an interview for the New York Times in itself isn't surprising. The New York Times is very left-leaning and very liberal, right up Father James Martin's alley. What was a bit more surprising was that the New York Times would have a conservative Catholic interviewing him. You would have expected them to pick somebody that would give him nice, softball questions, but instead they had somebody who was actually sort of pushing him on certain issues and kind of trying to get him to admit certain things. He's very clever with his words, he's slippery as an eel, he's a right jammy dodger, dodging and maneuvering around questions, sidestepping them. He did of course try to do the same thing in this interview, but there were a few points where he sort of revealed himself. I would say the mask slipped. It didn't completely fall off, but it certainly revealed some of his true beliefs and some of the things he really wants to change in the Catholic Church. So before I get into some of the things that Father James Martin said that revealed his true colours in a way, I want to play this first clip where he's asked about some of the things that Pope Francis changed, and he says this.
You know, for one thing, the catechism changed on the death penalty. It's now inadmissible. That's a small thing. For another, early in his papacy, he said he wanted more, I remember this line, incisive roles for women in leadership positions. And now you have a woman who's the head of a Vatican dicastery or office. The governor of Vatican City is a woman, right? So I think there have been real changes, right? Maybe not to the catechism, but changes in, church practice. For LGBTQ people, I think there's been significant changes. The ones that are perhaps the most kind of juridical would be the allowance of blessing of same-sex couples under certain circumstances.
So as you can see, he said Pope Francis permitted the blessings of same-sex couples in certain cases. The way he puts that immediately makes you think, right, so Pope Francis said you can bless same-sex relationships. But of course he would deny that because he didn't use the word relationships. He used the word couples. In certain situations he can bless same-sex couples. That could mean a couple comes over, Pope Francis blesses one individual, he blesses the other individual, and then they both leave. And he didn't actually bless the relationship himself. Pope Francis, in fact, did say during an interview with 60 Minutes that the church cannot bless the relationships, but they can bless people. But Father James Martin didn't say Pope Francis permitted blessings of individuals with same-sex attraction. He specifically said same-sex couples. So it's a very ambiguous way of talking where he's sort of saying something, but not quite saying it. Now, in this next clip, the interviewer tries to ask Father James Martin, without being too direct, whether the Catholic Church should permit same-sex relationships and permit same-sex marriage. Now, of course, he doesn't ask him the question directly, but he asks him, what does Jesus teach and what does the Church teach about sex and marriage that's constant?
What is the thing that Christianity teaches, that Jesus Christ teaches, right? That has to be held on to, that is different from what a nice, well-meaning, secular liberal listener of this show might believe about sex? What is the Christian difference that needs to remain no matter what kind of conversations and evolutions we have?
That's a great question. I'm not a theologian. I'm not a moral theologian, so I'll try my best to answer that.
You are a Jesuit. You are a priest. You are, a man. I think you're eminently qualified to answer the question.
I would say reverence for the other person. I would say sex and sexuality is something that is sacred, not using the other person, and the value of monogamous relationships. Well, I would say that's the distinctive Christian contribution today, which is reverencing the other person and not using the other person and seeing sexuality as sacred and deep and not something to be, just kind of used in a relationship. And I think that is different than a lot of liberal, secular understanding of sexuality. I mean, when people come to me in the confessional about that, that's one of my first questions. Are you reverencing the other person, right? How are you treating the other person? And I think that's different because I think in today's what Pope Francis would call throwaway culture, that's not accepted by every liberal, secular person. I mean, even a good person.
It's not. It's accepted by a lot of. I mean, I think the secular liberal narrative of sex that I certainly hear would say they might not use terms like reverence and sacred, right? But they would use terms like consent and respect and so on.
So you see, he doesn't give the normal answer you would expect from a priest in the Catholic Church, that would be to say sex is something that needs to remain in the confines of a marriage, and marriage is a holy sacrament between a man and a woman. He doesn't go there. He doesn't want to go there because he doesn't like the fact that the Church teaches that. And that's something he doesn't want to remain the teaching of the Catholic Church. So he goes into this nonsense about respecting one another, and then he tries to pass off that actually these are very Catholic teachings because the secular world doesn't respect these things. And then the interviewer rightly points out that no, actually, generally speaking, most people agree with what he's just said in the secular world. What they disagree with is that sex should remain within marriage, and that marriage is a sacred, holy sacrament between a man and a woman. Now, in this next clip is where I think the mask actually slips quite a bit. It doesn't fall off completely, but you really do get a bit of a reveal of what's really sitting inside Father James Martin. The interviewer asks him, with an issue such as homosexuality, if it remains what it is, would Father James Martin be content with that? That the Church doesn't move, doesn't change anything on its teaching of homosexuality. Would Father James Martin be okay with that? Would he be at peace with that? And of course, he pretty much reveals that he wouldn't.
Say 100 years goes by, right? And that becomes the equilibrium of the Catholic Church. The Church has a very pastoral sort of case-by-case approach to issues around sex and sexuality, right? But nothing ever changes in the formal teaching of the Church. The Church never sort of recognizes same-sex unions the way it recognizes heterosexual unions. It just sort of remains in this place. Are you personally content with that kind of?
I think we should know, because I think we should always be open to the signs of the times and what science teaches us and what we understand about the human condition. And I mean, you can go back to Thomas Aquinas and he's talking about that. We have to understand what, in terms of homosexuality, for example, like what are we learning? And we certainly don't want to say that we're in the same place that we would be 1,000 years ago about homosexuality, because we've learned things. And so I think, when you look at, for example, the Second Vatican Council, it's the Church in the modern world, not the Church against the modern world or the Church frustrating the modern world.
He feels the Church needs to move forward in its teaching about homosexuality because of science and because of what we've learned now. It shouldn't have the same teaching as it had 1,000 years ago. And of course, if it shouldn't have the same teaching as it had 1,000 years ago, then surely that would mean it should also change what's been written about it in the Bible, which was put together 2,000 years ago. Really revealing a lot there, Father James Martin, about what he really hopes happens in the Church in future. A large number of clergy in the Catholic Church felt a lot more comfortable to express their very liberal, left-leaning views under Pope Francis. Father James Martin is asked directly if it's fair to say that was the case, and he pretty much says yes.
From your point of view, right, and from the point of view of a lot of Catholics, the Francis pontificate was experienced as just a period of greater freedom. Like, you're a priest, you have vows, you're part of an order, right? You're under certain kinds of obedience. And it was clear to me, certainly, that there were lots and lots of people inside the Church who had opinions that they didn't feel comfortable expressing under John Paul II and Benedict, who felt comfortable expressing them under Francis, right? Is that a fair?
I think that's fair.
A fair description.
Yeah, I mean, Tom Rees, our editor at America Media, was fired by Cardinal Ratzinger, which was his right to do.
The future Pope Benedict.
Correct. Yeah. And he often said that I got fired for writing things and publishing things that Pope Francis is now saying, from the pulpit. So I think that's a fair comment. People felt freer to express themselves, yeah.
So those are what I consider some of the highlights, or should we say low points, of Father James Martin's interview. Thank you very much for watching. Have a blessed day.